Ele hadvarim. These are the words. Those are the opening words to the book of Devarim or Deuteronomy, one of my favorite books. It's the fifth book in the Jewish Torah, the fifth book in the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, or if you're a Christian, the fifth book in the Christian Old Testament. I believe in words. I believe in text. I believe in a textual life. I call myself a Jewish textualist because I live committed. That's why I have the yarmulke on my head. I live within the realm of the Jewish bookshelf. That's where I find inspiration. That's where I find text and words that speak to my heart. Sometimes they're biblical, like the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. Sometimes it's a book from a later portion of the Bible, like one of my favorite books as well, religious or otherwise, is the book of Kohelet or Ecclesiastes. Jews, we read this book every year during the festival of Sukkot, or the Feast of Booths. Christians sometimes say tabernacles. And I love that text. It's probably the reason that Sukkot is my favorite holiday, because I read the book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, every year. And it means something different every time I read it. In addition to that, while I'm committed to the Jewish bookshelf, I come from a background that's a mixture of Judaism and Christianity. And so I also am interested in what the Christians are reading. The New Testament, to me, is Second Temple Jewish literature, and I love to read the New Testament in that format. I think a lot of American Jews would have some problems with that, and the New Testament kind of is this foreign entity. But I found that a lot of Israelis are comfortable with it, including Israeli Orthodox Jews who are modern religious people studying Jewish literature, Jewish text, and there's a lot of some of the best professors of the New Testament are modern Orthodox Jews in Israel. And so I read those texts. I also am interested in theological text. And Jews, we tend to have a lot of philosophical text. We have a lot of legal texts. Our theology our modern theologians are kind of wanting. And so unlike a lot of Jewish theologians, they tend to read Christian theologians and then try to extrapolate for themselves what has meaning as for a Jewish person and what would be specific to Christianity that wouldn't transfer over. And so one of my favorite authors is C.S. Lewis. But I like this notion of, in a textual life, that I can read C.S. Lewis and I can also read Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, because they were writing at the same time, and we can read across these texts and find that they are addressing the same issues, the same concerns sometimes, and we can find that those texts enrich our lives. Ele hadvarim, these are the words. In addition to this, I've always been a person who's partial to biographies. I, growing up, was one of the few kids when I'd go to school and it was library day and the librarian would release us to the bookshelves to find books to check out. I usually had no trouble spreading out because I went to the biography section of the library, and all of my classmates were in other areas looking at the art books or the fiction, and I was in the biographies. And I loved biographies. Growing up, I really, really loved biographies of civil rights leaders, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth I have a special relationship with because I teach fifth grade English, and I discovered her biography when I was in fifth grade as well. And as I got older, one of my favorite biographies was the autobiography of Malcolm X, written with Alex Haley. Now, I call myself the out-of-step reader because I'm out of step with different things. So one of my favorite books is the autobiography of Malcolm X. One of my other favorite biographies is a biography of William F. Buckley, the leader of the conservative movement in America for years, and also the head editor and I believe founder of the National Review, conservative magazine. You would not think that someone who really likes the autobiography of Malcolm X and someone who likes the biography of William F. Buckley would probably those people would go together, and I don't think they necessarily do. And so that's one of those areas where I'm out of step. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, Ecclesiastes, Deuteronomy, C.S. Lewis, Abraham Joshua Heschel, Malcolm X, William F. Buckley. And to add on to that, I also have found myself in the last few years employed as a middle school English teacher, which was not something I ever thought I would do. And so now I find myself reading a lot of middle grade fictional text. And so I'm adding one more layer. And that's why I'm out of step, because the people who are reading the middle grade fiction are not reading the Parashat HaShavua necessarily, the weekly Torah portion, the 5 books of Moses that are read every year. And the people who are studying the Parashat HaShavua are not necessarily reading the autobiography of Malcolm X and the biography of William F. Buckley. Or if they are, they're only reading one of those. They're not necessarily reading both. And so I call myself the out-of-step reader because I am out of step with all these segments of society. I am committed most to the Jewish bookshelf. That's where I find the texts that speak to my soul. That's why I have the yarmulke on. I'm not a person who is committed necessarily to religiosity. I just love these texts the most, and these are the texts that speak to me. I always think of the textual life as when the iPhone came out, and everyone would always say there's an app for that. There's an app for this. You can download an app on your phone for just about anything. For me, I believe whatever we go through in life, there's a text for that. There's a text that we can turn to. There's a text sets that we can turn to, whether it be poetry, whether it be religious literature, whether scriptural pieces to turn to, whether it be a biography, whether it be a novella. There are texts that we can turn to. I call myself a Jewish textualist because for religious purposes, I find that Jewish texts speak to my soul the most. But I would also be out of step because while I love the Parashat HaShavua, the Torah portion that's read every week in the synagogue, I also love Sholem Aleichem. I love Itzik Monger. I love Yaakov or Jacob Glotstein. I think sometimes about writing poetry, and then I read a poem by Jacob Glotstein, and I just say, forget it. It's not going to happen. He has already spoken what my soul is feeling through his dialogues with God and the Jewish people. And so I am committed to text. I'm out of step because I don't really have any particular world that I fit into. I just really, really love the textual life. And I believe that regardless of your religion or your ethnic and cultural background, whether you're male or female, that there are texts out there for us to reach out to and that will stir our soul. I used to work with terminally ill children, so sometimes I question the notion of God and God in the world, even though I have the yarmulke on and I read religious Jewish texts. For me, it's more dialogical than anything else. But I do believe in the concept of the soul, and I think that texts speak to our souls. I think that regardless of where we're at, that we are shaped by certain texts. One of my favorite authors is Saul Bellow. Saul Bellow was from a religious Jewish family, and he left that, but he was influenced by that. And at the same time, one of the books that influenced him the most was the King James Bible and the New Testament. And so I love this idea of having these texts that shape us from various places, and that the textual life is this notion that Ele hadvarim, these are the words. We have words that we can reach to. And my words may not be the same as yours. I've heard that there's a group now that reads Harry Potter as a literary text that speaks to their heart and their soul. They're not particularly religious people necessarily, although I think some may be. But for them, Harry Potter is what they turn to when they're going through an emotional moment in life. And as a textualist, I have to say that's something that I relate to. And I think that these texts have meaning. Texts shape us. We are shaped by them. And I think that being an out-of-step reader for me just means that I interact with textualists of various persuasions. But of course, I always come back to Ele Hadvarim. These are the words. We have words that we reach to in various languages from various sources, and that these texts have meaning to our lives, and they add meaning to our lives. So that's just a little rant about textualism and living a textualist life for all those people out there who are interested. So this is for you, Mom.